Hello and welcome to episode 13 of the Batman on Film Satellite Show. This show is a proud member of the Batman Podcast Network, hosted by Batman on Film. You can check out all the shows. If you go to BOF proper under the podcast tab, you can see the shows or the Batman Podcast Network. And you can also follow the network on Twitter at Batpod Network, and also follow BOF's Instagram at Batman on Film. And if you're listening to this show on Apple Podcasts, it's in the same feed, of course, as all the other BOF main shows. Please take the time to rate and review us. It would really help us out. And today's topic is the first part in a discussion about the long-awaited, much-anticipated Obi-Wan Kenobi limited series airing on Disney+. I am your host, Ryan Hoth. See what I did there? And nice. I, like Obi-Wan, have returned from my self-imposed exile for one last mission. I haven't done a podcast for a while, so that's also it's another joke. And I can't do that mission alone, so I brought Chris Clow along for the ride. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing well, my friend. Thank you for the invitation. It's good to be home.
Yeah. It's always good to do things for BOF, even if it's not Batman related, I guess.
Yeah.
It's funny, like Bill's picked up the satellite show Torch lately. He's been getting really into it. He's doing shows on Better Call Saul with his daughter, and he told me he's gonna do 2 satellite shows on Elvis. He's gonna do
2?
I was like, how are you gonna do 2 shows? He said he's gonna do one about just him and his relationship or fandom with Elvis, and then he's going to do another one for the new movie. So like a 2-part thing. And then he's like, and then I'm done with satellite shows for a while, so y'all got to pick up the torch and do a Obi-Wan show. And when he asked me if I wanted to do a show on Obi-Wan, I was like, well, I'm watching this. I'm rewatching it right now, so I think I'm interested enough to do an Obi-Wan show. And he was pretty interested. He was like, "How many episodes? I don't have Disney Plus. Should I watch it?" So this, I'm pretty sure he'll listen to this show at least, and that maybe that way it'll entice him and maybe some other listeners that might not have taken the Disney Plus plunge, because we're gonna do 2 shows on Obi-Wan. It's a 6-episode series, so it's pretty short. It's like a limited series, and the first 3 episodes are out, so we're going to do this show here at the halfway point, and we'll do another wrap-up after the series wraps up in a few weeks with its 6th episode. So I guess just overall, like, in general, this show, movie, I mean, it's a project that's been in the works or rumored or just desired by fans for a long time, to have this sort of like cinematic live action gap filler of what happened with Obi-Wan in between episode 3 and 4. And you see him in some of the other ancillary Star Wars type things, like in Rebels, and you have Clone Wars and shows like that. But it just makes so much sense nowadays with Ewan McGregor being of age and being still, interested in being part of the universe. And, of course, this was rumored to be, or was in development as a movie a few years ago. And now with Disney Plus, they've been able to kind of transition it into a limited series. And it's been interesting to see that transition, because they were almost ready to make the show at one point, and they put it on hold and restarted it and scratched all the scripts and redid it. So it seems like from a production standpoint, from a Lucasfilm standpoint, they were very committed, I think, to doing it justice. And of course, it wouldn't be Star Wars without tons of opinions. And now that there are 3 episodes out, there are tons of opinions out about how good or not good the show is, or how many plot holes there are, or whatever. It wouldn't be Star Wars without that. And we're of course going to put our 2 cents in, put our feathers in the cap. So, what were your thoughts, Chris, about like even wanting an Obi-Wan show, and then kind of the anticipation building up to this? Because it's been quite a while since we have been looking forward to this thing, and now it's half over.
Yeah, I know, which is weird to think about. But honestly, like, I've wanted this show really ever since the rumors first started to leak out about George Lucas himself developing a live-action Star Wars series.
Ooh, and that was the 100 episode live-action thing.
Yeah.
And that was before the Disney purchase of
well
Lucasfilm.
Before. I mean, honestly, like, if I really want to be honest with myself, then I probably wanted this show since the summer of 2005. Because it just seemed like, first of all, it's too long of a runway, and those characters are too rich not to play with them. But then, as time went on and it seemed like Star Wars might have been sort of fading into the ether, we had the 6 movies, and then things started to fade away. And then the Disney sale happened, and pretty much in concert with the Disney sale, they announced that we were getting episode 7, which would probably lead to episodes 8 and 9. And the universe was ignited again. And it looked like they were planning on exploiting that in the cinematic realm, and then things went the way that they did. Successes and failures happened, and then streaming took the form that it did, and you have Disney Plus, and you had the really extreme breakout success of The Mandalorian, and you're starting to see these streaming services with these long-standing IP start to dig into the well. This show was a natural addition to that entire lineup. And you mentioned a lot of the things that are working in its favor, Ewan McGregor being really of age to do it. And the really interesting thing, the opportunity that is provided by the prequels having been relatively recent films, within the last 20 years, is that you have the renewed opportunity to revisit the franchise's most classic characters without having to rely on performers who have definitively aged out of being able to play those roles at this period of time. I mean, it's just such a perfect sweet spot that I don't understand how they could have really ignored it for as long as they did. This show should have happened sooner, but the fact that it's here now, I'm really thrilled with. McGregor is often considered to be the best part of the prequel trilogy. He's a performer in a category unto his own. I love his Obi-Wan. I loved his Obi-Wan in the prequels, and this seems just like a really interesting logical progression coming out of the prequels, nestling before the original trilogy is sort of an interquel period that it's playing with. So I find the entire concept intoxicating, and I was just totally on board with them moving forward with it.
Was that a reference to Attack of the Clones, the intoxicating?
It depends. It's in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
But one thing that I will say, and I know that I'm going to be crossing the streams a little bit here, and I know that's irritating to some people, but I'm also a big Star Trek fan. And similarly,
when crossing the streams is a Ghostbusters reference.
I'm crossing all sorts of streams, man.
It's all sorts of streams.
They're just
lightsabers, crossing the lightsabers.
throwing it all into the kitchen sink. No, but I mean, it's really interesting to see the trajectories that these particularly spacefaring IP have gone on, because Star Trek, for all intents and purposes, was dead between really solidly between 2016 and 2017, but really it left television in 2005. And didn't come back to television until this streaming renaissance in 2017.
And now we've got so much Star Trek, it's ridiculous. And we're getting the movies back too. It's just insane.
Yeah, well, that honestly, it remains to be seen. However, you're not wrong. To quote my buddy Paul, who's a big Star Wars fan, you're not wrong just in terms of the proliferation. And it looks like Star Wars is going to begin to follow sort of a similar template in terms of proliferating more and more material on television. So it's just fascinating to see, because they're both comparable in the sense that they're really long standing. You know, they go back to the 60s and 70s. They've had, several films. There's 11 Star Wars films, and there's 13 Star Trek films. And now several different permutations on TV, and they're both getting renewed interest and attention on these streaming services. And it's fascinating to see that happen. And kind of like Star Trek, Star Wars is understanding, hey, these classic characters, we need to use them where we can and while we can. And at the same time, you have two very different shows, but that harken back to the roots of each franchise that are happening right now. And that's just awesome as a fan of both. So they take very different approaches, though.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's fascinating that Star Wars live action show wise, the runway was done by something more wholly original, like The Mandalorian, but it's given way to bringing us, shows for Boba Fett and Obi-Wan, and soon an Ahsoka live action show. And that's really cool. I'm glad that they didn't just do Obi-Wan right out of the gate, because it gave the technology time to catch up enough to. And that was always what George Lucas was trying to do. That's why he never got his TV show off the ground, because he wanted the technology to be good enough to have the quality
Classic
he wanted
Lucas.
on TV. Yeah,
classic, right? But
yeah.
No, he's always like I love George Lucas because he's a big technology proponent, which can bite him in the ass sometimes. But still, you can't fault the guy for having vision. But no, you're right, and I mean, seeing the roots of Star Wars on TV and the way that it's been exploited with The Mandalorian. I mean, the timelines are kind of all over the place in terms of where they want to play, but actually the last time I was on a BOF show talking about Star Wars was way back in 2018 when we did the solo review show. Whoa. And the thing that I remember talking about a lot in that show was just being so excited about the Maul cameo, because the Maul cameo just opened the floodgates in terms of introducing more of the extended canon into the live action version of the universe.
Right.
And that really, really was the tip of the iceberg. And that, I truly believe anyway, has led to this new sort of television renaissance that we're seeing, because there is so much untapped mythology in Star Wars that has been established as canon from that material, that it just seemed like it would make perfect sense to toss that stuff into a live action show. And now we're seeing that on a whole other scale. It's really a thrilling time to be a Star Wars fan, at least as long as you're good natured about it.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're already very familiar with all that material, you're being rewarded. And if you're not, you're kind of like me, watching like, okay, well, why does this matter? Okay, is this character just in this show, or was this in something else beforehand?
Yeah. But I mean, if you are seeing this show, then you probably have Disney Plus, and you can just click over to the other stuff, and you can absorb it in your own time.
Yeah. That's absolutely the case.
Yeah.
So I guess we should get into talking about the show itself. I mean, the way they've rolled it out has been pretty awesome. The show premiered with 2 episodes right out of the gate. And then they moved the time back, a few hours. Normally it's like a 3 a.m. thing.
Right.
But they made it like 9 so people could just watch it. And so I was all ready to not watch it on the launch day, and then they moved the time up, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm staying up because I don't want to not get behind or get spoiled, because now these episodes are coming out. I really just don't want to be spoiled. And when it's so accessible.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I didn't really watch many trailers or get too much into it because I didn't want to be spoiled, and I was going to watch it anyway. It's definitely one of those combo things, and I've been waiting so long. You know, why ruin it now?
Sure.
So yeah, like the first episode, I mean overall, I mean I'm enjoying the show quite a bit. And it was interesting to see where Obi-Wan has been for 10 years. I guess that's the basic thing, is that it starts off 10 years after Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
So, you know, Obi-Wan's just doing what you saw him do at the end of Revenge of the Sith. He's in exile. He's changed his name to Ben, or he's being referred to as Ben. He's just kind of hanging out in Tatooine, keeping a very low profile, a very, you know, day-to-day existence, and kind of keeping out of the spotlight until things start to happen that he can't ignore. And I think that's kind of one of the main themes of the show, about, like, you know, how Jedi can't ignore what they have been called to do. And you see Obi-Wan grapple with that quite a bit, but then he keeps having to kind of come back to the Obi-Wan that he used to be. And 3 episodes in, I hope he gets a little closer because I'm feeling pretty bad for him.
Sure. I mean, I was fascinated by what his life looked like in that period after Revenge of the Sith. I mean, it makes a lot of sense just considering what that isolation does. And I mean, we've started to see now the effects of isolation on Jedi in a couple of different scenarios. And one of the things that seems to be consistent across most of the depictions, at least that I've exposed myself to, is cutting yourself off from the Force. And you know, we have a pretty decent understanding in the previous movies and in the expanded universe material about just like the abilities of perception that Force wielders have, particularly on the dark side. So it makes sense that he would try to bury himself in the world that he lives in as much as possible, and he only really reaches out in total solitude. And there's something that is really lonely about that. It connects with something that he says in the 3rd episode, which I won't get to yet, but I found a lot of really interesting poetry between the 1st and the 3rd episodes, and just in the way that Obi-Wan refers to the Force itself. But no, I mean, honestly, I could have had 6 episodes of just his life on Tatooine.
Yeah, just like Obi-Wan Life Simulator. It's like,
okay, yeah.
And you get to see him go through the motions a little bit, you know, and that is an advantage of this being a 6-part series, is they have the time to show him, you know, cutting the meat and wrapping it up and going back to the town and feeding it to, you know, and going back to his house and seeing the droid, you know, his little like warning droid too, so you can see like what a normal day is. And so when things start to not be normal, and things start to stick out.
Yeah, and I thought that was a really effective way to establish what the repetition of his life has become, and it also helps to reinforce why he is so out of practice. But there's also a downside that comes with that, and you can tell that he's not proud of it, because when Nari, the surviving Jedi, comes to him and begs him for help, basically, and Obi-Wan turns him away, he's not happy about having to do that. I mean, you could tell that Nari, who's probably pretty young when Order 66 happened, was thrilled about meeting such a legendary Jedi Master, maybe again, but certainly for the first time in a long time. And Obi-Wan at least has his eye on the ball when it comes to survival. And it's a nice juxtaposition with where you see the Inquisitorius talking about what they need to bring a Jedi out of hiding. And even though it kills him to do it, he is not giving in to those impulses of exposing himself when he knows he might be able to make a difference, because he's got his eye on something potentially far more important for the future. I mean, it totally lines up with everything that we know about who Obi-Wan is in both the original trilogy and in the prequels, but there's also a tinge of tragedy to it because he even feels, and I think he explicitly says, the fight's over, we lost.
Mm-hmm.
But he still is holding on to that last chance for a new hope.
Yeah. And even to that point, like even when he finds out that Leia is in danger, he tells, he says that like find somebody else. I can't do this. And that was pretty shocking, like that it took more prodding,
Yeah, I agree with you. And honestly, I've tried to stay away from where a lot of the criticism comes from. And I know that certain people have taken exception to that. But really, right. I mean, when you're charged with creating a new story within the established bounds of, we've seen the past and we've seen the future from this character's point of view.
Exactly.
I think it makes a lot of sense for the isolation to have really been wearing him down for 10 years. And then something comes along that might reignite his passion a little bit. Where we see him in A New Hope, where he's absolutely willing to jump at the chance to help Leia, now we know again. He's gone through whatever we're going to see him go through. At this point, he hasn't gone through that. There's some lesson that he hasn't learned yet about the difference that he can make while still being true to his isolation. But at that point too, Luke is in the picture, and Luke presents a whole new opportunity. And this really, at that point, he's ready for Luke to take the first step towards his own Force sensitivity. Right. And we're far away from that at this point in this show. So it totally tracks with my understanding of who this guy is for him to say, look, I'm focused on this kid. If I fail, which I think I'm going to do, then I could also fail him. And if I fail him, then that could be really, really devastating for all of us. So I get it. And I don't really understand any criticism, especially considering that we're halfway through the show. And at this point, we were one episode into the show.
Yeah. And I keep trying to connect the dots too, because I'm like, well, when you see Obi-Wan in episode 4, Luke clearly knows who he is, but hasn't seen him in a long time. So, but that also means that he was never able to train him. But you get a scene about that in episode 1 of this show. You actually get to see Obi-Wan talk to Owen about that. Like, when the time comes, he must be trained. And then he's like, no, hell no.
Yeah,
You're not doing it.
And the scene with Owen, which is awesome. I'm glad that they were able to get Joel Edgerton to come back. I'm sure that in 2001, when he was shooting those scenes in Tunisia, that he had no idea he'd be back 20 years later. But it's cool that they were able to get him. But it does help to further reinforce when you take into account the things that you learn at the beginning of episode 4. Luke didn't even know that Obi-Wan had fought in the Clone Wars. So who's to say how much he actually knew about everything that Obi-Wan did and what he was responsible for and the just the role that he played in that conflict. Owen had Luke's life locked down, and you really get the sense in just those few moments that they share, and then later on when Owen actually puts himself at risk for probably more for Luke than Obi-Wan, but still for Obi-Wan a little bit. He's committed to try and give this kid a normal life. He thinks that the story of the Jedi is over. He just wants to protect his nephew. So why are you trying to impose yourself onto him when all you bring is danger? And, oh yeah, you trained his father, and how did that go? So again, I think those threads line up really, really well. And Luke demonstrates, by the time we get to episode 4, a bit of a rebellious streak. What a shock. The symbol of the Rebel Alliance is a little bit of a rebel in and of himself. So I think it all fits together so far. And it really does help to reinforce that Owen is really trying to maybe force Luke into another path, but he's also trying to do it for his safety.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, so let's get into little Leia a little bit, because
Yeah.
you get in episode 4, you get to see the extent of Obi-Wan's interaction and relationship with Luke, really, and you don't, and you know that there is some sort of backstory or history between him and Leia, but you don't know to what extent.
Mhm.
Either they did interact before, or she knows about him through her father somehow, and it's kind of incredible. It's one of those things where when you get introduced to the character in the show, it's like, oh, I did not expect this. I did not expect that this is where this show was going to go. But now that this is where it is going, I think it's pretty awesome. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things that could turn out really badly, or if it wasn't done correctly, or it's a very tricky thing to pull off what they're doing. And I think that they are doing it very successfully so far, at least. I guess we'll see how it all turns out eventually, but it is providing them a lot of very interesting story opportunities for a character that I didn't really think we'd see much more exploration with in live action at all, of course, because Carrie Fisher's passed away. But I just felt like there wasn't much to do with her.
Sure.
If that, I don't know how bad that sounds, but really, it's like
No,
getting
no.
her interacting with Obi-Wan in this way, this soon, is really interesting.
I don't think that that's a bad conclusion to draw, because there's really they did a really good job, at least I thought. I mean, and I tried to limit myself to any pre-release information that might have come out. So Leia was kind of a shock to me. I didn't see that coming 1,000 miles away. I was like, well, Leia's on Alderaan and Obi-Wan's on Tatooine and blah, blah, blah,
right.
blah, blah. But
I mean, it was clear that something Obi-Wan was going to go away from Tatooine at some point, but I couldn't imagine that it would
they would cross paths, at least. Yeah, I mean, that's what was in my head too. But I think a lot of Star Wars fans, after Carrie Fisher died, had made peace with the idea that, well, this is a character we're not going to see again, and we have to just sort of close the book on Leia. And it's
especially after the ultimate hat trick, in my opinion, of what they were able to do in episode 9. I mean, our buddy Paul raves about episode 9, and I'm a big fan of it too. And what they were able to do with Leia, I think, is really, truly nothing short of a damn miracle. Being able to take the scraps of footage they had and actually make a gigantic story point and end of an arc out of that, and still make it true to the character, I think was just ridiculously impressive.
The fact that they were able to pull it off as well as they did is a testament to their ability to make use of the footage that they had access to, certainly. I mean, it's no secret to you or really anybody else that I'm not a very big fan of that movie. But part of it too is not the movie's fault, because Carrie Fisher wasn't around. Even though they managed to include Leia and they did a really good job of showing her in the instances where she appeared, her absence was very much felt in that movie, and it probably would have been improved significantly if Carrie Fisher was around to. Of course, there was an interview, I think, with Mark Hamill, or it might have been with Mark Hamill, it might have been with Rian Johnson, where Carrie Fisher said, "Oh well, 9 is my movie. Harrison had his movie, Mark had his movie."
Well, clearly it would have been.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just sad all around. And it goes back to the idea of having to close the book on Leia, not just because, not only did the performer pass away, but we saw the character die in a movie. It was an easy thing to sort of compartmentalize Leia, but the way that they have made use of her on this show is downright shocking to me in how well it is being executed, and that's due in no small part to Vivian Lyra Blair, who plays her. As child actors and actresses probably get a obscenely unfair amount of scrutiny, especially from fan bases like this. But this kid is very good. At least I think so.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fact that she has just this spunk that is very recognizable as Leia's, but then in later episodes too, she shows a degree of empathy and vulnerability and warmth that is also absolutely in line with who Leia is and who she's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And at a different point in her life, she's understandably more playful. She's a 10-year-old kid, right? And there's something to be said here about exposing
There's more
her...
depth in her than in like Luke in episode 4. It's really ridiculous.
Yeah, probably. And I think a lot of that is due to, her station in life. She is given a greater degree of responsibility than Luke even conceives of even as a child. And they hint at that a little bit when Leia shows up in Rebels too. But this is there's just such a beautiful way of showing the beginning of this character while also making her fun and familiar and friendly, and but also like the adventure that she goes on over the course of these episodes. I get the sense just in watching it that there is going to be an arc here that is about something of the loss of innocence. And not that Leia is a harsh person by the time we meet her in the original trilogy, far from it, but she does have a harder edge to her. I mean, you have to have a harder edge if you look Darth Vader in the face without blinking,
Right.
There's a hardness to her that it just speaks to her constitution and her internal strength as a character.
Yeah.
And I get the sense that this sort of crucible that she's going through in this story could be the foundation for that.
Yeah, to take her responsibilities like deathly seriously. Yeah, I'm sure she'll be tested in some way. Yeah. And it's really interesting to be able to track different characters' arcs in this series so far. I mean, it's not just Obi-Wan. I mean, obviously he's the main character, but I'm invested in little Leia, and I think there's some other characters that are going to continue to be explored as the series goes on. So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the Inquisitors. We were talking a little bit before the show about them. These are characters that were what? Where were they first introduced? Was it in one of the games, or was it like in Rebels?
I thought it was in Rebels.
Okay.
That was the first place that I saw them. And it seemed like, the Grand Inquisitor that was voiced by Jason Isaacs, I think he showed up in the very first episode of Rebels and had communicated directly with Vader. So that was the first time that I remember learning about the Inquisitorius as a concept and their role in exterminating remaining Jedi after Order 66.
Right. So they're basically, are they Sith, or are they kind of like Sith light? Like,
so this is an interesting question because I have to qualify this because a lot of my perceptions about the dividing line between Jedi and Sith is probably a little bit outdated by today's standards, just because I haven't read every canon book and seen every canon episode since the Disney sale, but I have absorbed some. My perception has always been that unless you learned directly from a Sith Lord, you are not a true Sith. The Palpatine, for all of his faults, is a true hardcore believer in Sith doctrine, and that comes with the rule of two. So It's he and Vader, and they look out for each other. At least they say that to each other, and that's it. So the Inquisitorius, at least when it comes to the Grand Inquisitor, I think his background was as a temple guard at the Jedi Temple, so he wasn't. I don't think he was a full-on Jedi, but he had Force sensitivity.
But they are Force users of some sort.
Yeah, and Vader just kind of crushed. It's like, like juicing an orange with your bare hand. Through Force, he crushed the juice out of the Inquisitor so that he could become the Grand Inquisitor. which is also kind of the story that goes behind why their lightsabers are red now, which is also really cool. But so there's Force sensitivity, but I had always seen them referred to in previous EU material as Dark Jedi, not as Sith Lords.
Huh. Okay.
But that's probably, again, there's probably Star Wars fans who are listening to this who are up to date with everything, screaming at their phones or whatever they're listening to this on, saying, no, that's not right. But my perception, at least for what it's worth, is that they're not actual Sith.
Right. Okay. But they do use the Force in for evil purposes. So so that's the thing, is like the one that the one that they've focused on the most has been the third sister, Reva,
Mm-hmm.
and she's interesting. She's seems to be the most divisive, I guess, or most talked about on social media. Depending on where you're looking, of course, controversial about, and of course the shows had to come out and which it's been great to see how quickly and absolutely both like all of the official Star Wars accounts and Ewan McGregor and everybody's been like, there's no place for racism here. Can we stop this bullshit? You got to see so much of it come out with, the sequel trilogy and through The Last Jedi and stuff. And it's just annoying to have to deal with that kind of crap in fandom. And so it was refreshing to see like the official accounts just be like, nope, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
So, but I Reva is interesting to me, and based off the way that the show opens, it makes me think that, especially once you get to the third episode of this series, something's going on with her.
Yeah.
About her motivations, and of course, and you get to see her talk to Vader at the beginning of the third episode. So there's something behind this character that I know is going to continue to get explored. Or I'm just very curious to where she's going to end up. Is she going to end up becoming good? Is she going to be like a Vader type figure towards the end, where like she turns good at the very end and ends up paying the price and dying for it or something, like what's going to happen?
Yeah, we've seen other members of the Inquisitorius fall down that path, not just the Grand Inquisitor, but for anybody that's played Fallen Order. That was a pretty memorable moment, I think. But no, I think, you brought up the scene depicting Order 66, which was hard to watch the day that it came out. But suffice it to say that there's a reason that was there. It's not just because they did a really effective job bottling the whole prequel trilogy before the show kicked off in earnest. But we saw that Order 66 flashback as separate from that.
Mm-hmm. That's like when the show starts in earnest, basically.
Yeah. So there's a separate reason that that's the case. And my guess is that she was in the temple that day.
Mm-hmm.
But that also brings up, like, even if she were, like, let's just take that at face value. Let's assume, even though it hasn't been established yet by the time we're talking about this, let's assume that that's the case, that she was a Padawan youngling in the Jedi Temple when Vader and the 501st invaded. Wouldn't that put more of her rage toward Vader instead of Obi-Wan? Because for whatever reason, she is furious. She's got a bee in her bonnet when it comes to Obi-Wan specifically. Right. And she wants to take him down. And I mean, that could be, like, we know it just, at least just based on the timeline from the way that we saw Order 66 depicted in Episode 3, Obi-Wan and Yoda return to the temple after the siege by the clone troopers and by Vader. Maybe that plays into things in some respect, and maybe she thinks that Obi-Wan didn't do enough to try and protect the younglings. I'm just totally spitballing. It's my own script. Nobody cares. But just to say that we're going to have something established where she places blame at Obi-Wan's feet for something. Maybe it's Order 66. Maybe it's something else. Maybe she blames Obi-Wan indirectly for creating Vader, like Luke did. Hard to tell, but there's certainly more going on there, and it's going to be interesting. I love the way that she plays the scenes that she is in, because it's like there's this anger that's bubbling below the surface, but she also seems to understand that she needs to control her impulses in order to do the things that she wants and needs to do.
Yeah, and there's almost some sort of, I don't know what it is, maybe some sort of regret or something. Like in the third episode, she's finding the secret passageways and she sees the symbol on the wall, and she's kind of like, she's obviously conflicted about something, or at least maybe thinking about the past or something. It's deliberate. I interpreted it a couple of different ways. That was one of them, and also too, did I miss all these people? Like, are these all targets that I missed as a member of the Inquisitorius? Right, because early on they say like part of their job through Vader is that they are tracking down anybody with force sensitivity and like killing them, basically, I guess, to kind of like stamp out. I guess it kind of goes to the Last Jedi kind of thing. At the end of the Last Jedi, there's people that can use the force that are popping up across the galaxy, and they're trying to stop that from happening. No,
it brings a lot of historical parallels too with the kinds of ethnic cleansing campaigns that we've seen terrible dictatorships perpetrate in the past too, which is totally in line with the behavior that you saw the Empire perpetrate, not just in the original trilogy, but in things that happened afterward, as well as the First Order and even the Confederacy to a certain degree. But they're space Nazis, and they're doing space Nazi things, so it makes sense. They're trying to crush this any hint of the light that could create that same kind of opposition that will potentially prove to be their undoing. I mean, they're basically trying to prevent what will become the rise of Luke Skywalker, but they don't know that that's what they're trying to prevent yet. But I love the idea too, and I know we jumped around, like we talked a little bit about episode 1, and we talked a little bit about part 2, and now we're kind of jumping into part 3. But in part 3, when Obi-Wan and Leia reach the planet and they're led by the Imperial defector into that specialized room, it's like, holy crap, this is an underground railroad for Jedi.
Exactly.
That's such a cool concept. Yeah. And it's the way that the prequel trilogy portrayed the Jedi Order as being reasonably vast. Like, it always kind of bugged me that Order 66 was this thing that just so effectively got rid of them all. And I like one of the things that I do like about the universe having this new life in these other mediums is that that wasn't really the case. Like,
there's more nuance to it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like and appreciate that. They name dropped Quinlan Vos, which I thought was really cool. But episode 3 of this show, like 2 was good, but it was more just kind of establishing the stakes. And there's only really one major thing that happened in it, and that's Obi-Wan finding out that Vader is still alive, which was a great moment. I don't want to take away from it.
Yeah, that's how it. Yeah, the ending was good. And Flea dies, right?
Flea dies. Yeah, I was texting with my brother, and he said, "Oh, I saw Flea," and I told him, "Yeah, I'm surprised he didn't try to challenge McFly to a street race." I
know.
But man, that third episode was such a fascinating thing to watch.
Fascinating, and that's the one I've gone back to that quite often. I mean, it's been out for 2 days, but or a day. I've been going back to it and just being like, okay, what does this scene mean? What does that scene mean? What is happening here?
And I can't believe I'm watching this.
Or I can't believe I'm watching this. The whole, I don't know, the last 15 minutes of that episode is like, holy hell, like, wow. And of course, a lot of people are like, looks like TV. It looks just not what I wanted. I'm like, this is really good stuff. Like,
You're
I'm
like,
so
what the
glad
hell
I'm
are you
like
talking
ignoring. I
about?
mean, I'm so glad I'm ignoring the some of the criticism. But yeah, so let's get into that episode 3, which I like to call what, like, Revenge of the Sith 2, episode 3, 2.
3.5,
Yeah,
maybe 3.3. We'll see what the
right.
other episodes have.
Yeah, exactly. So well, I guess we skipped over episode 2, parts of episode 2. You know, the Haja Estri, the fake Jedi that gets them off of the planet. He was that was unexpected and pretty cool character. I kind of wonder if he'll come back.
I kind of hope so.
Show.
I mean,
yeah.
I like the idea that, yeah, he's kind of a jackass, and he's kind of a scoundrel, and he's a crook and a thief, but also too, the fact that he now realizes that one of the most visible heroes of the Clone Wars has survived the Purge is an inspiration for him to try and be better, at least in that moment.
Yeah,
and I like that.
And it was, I keep bringing up The Last Jedi in this show, but like he was a cool character that ended up having more depth than like a DJ from The Last Jedi, where it's like, oh, he was a bad guy. You know, he's kind of a in between and ended up so far, you know, being a good guy. So yeah, and to see how he is actually connected to these, you know, Jedi Underground Railroad type people is fascinating. It does provide a lot of depth. So going back to the end of episode 2, it was cool to see the angle they took on the revelation that Anakin's alive. Like, and there's a lot of information that gets put out there. It's like, oh, Obi-Wan didn't really know Anakin was alive until right then. And the look on his face is like absolute, I don't know, terror, regret. Like, it's all bottled up in there. And then the other thing that was interesting to me was to hear Reva say Anakin. Like, it's my understanding even knowing that Vader is Anakin Skywalker is kind of a unknown thing. But of course, like, she's an Inquisitor, so it's something that she knows, and it's information she's able to use to freak Obi-Wan out, right?
Or she figured it out. This is actually something I can speak to. So, one of the canon books that I read was Tarkin by James Luceno. Main character being Tarkin. What a shock. But there's a really great scene in that book where Tarkin is summoned to Coruscant, to Imperial Center, which is like the seat of the Empire. It's exactly what it sounds like Imperial Center. And that's where, at least my perception is, that's where we learn what happened to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant after Order 66.
Oh.
Palpatine moved in.
Mm-hmm.
He became his home. Like the Jedi, the Grand Tower or the spire that the Jedi Council sat in became Palpatine's bedroom.
Wow.
And the temple itself became like a giant Imperial administration building and courthouse, and it's just like such a Sith thing to do. It's like it's petty, but it's also dominant. You know, like,
I do not expect this show to go there, but it would be fascinating to see that. Like, I don't think that we'll see like the Emperor, but it would be interesting to see because the Empire is 10 years in at this point.
It's at the height of its power. Yeah,
at the height of its power, it would be really interesting to see like how that seems to, like, it's at the height of its power, but not yet like Death Star. We're gonna do whatever we want, you know, type. Sure. And you still have people like Bail Organa that are, you know, at least still part of the Galactic Senate or whatever, right? So it'd be. Yeah. I'd love to see, like, well, what does that look like now? How does the Emperor, how does Palpatine like interact with people now that he's like Emperor Palpatine?
And that book is really revelatory in that he doesn't really, like, he keeps to himself. Rebels also showed the idea that when he gives addresses, he does so under the guise of a hologram before his scarring at the hands of Mace Windu. So like he's very like guarded. But
Oh,
Vader,
he's like a hologram that looks like his old self?
Exactly. Yeah.
Ooh. Dang.
When he projects out to the rest of the galaxy, when he's giving his vaunted communications. But Vader shows up in that book, and there's a lot of like internal pontificating by Tarkin about Vader's origins and like his place in the military hierarchy of the Empire. He described him as having an invisible rank. So it's just assumed that if Vader is in the same room as an Imperial admiral with the Navy, they defer to Vader. Like he's got that kind of absolute power and control that is unquestioned except for the Emperor. So, and it also kind of goes to certain lengths to justify like what kind of situation would take place where Vader might be taking orders from Tarkin, like we see in Episode 4. But Tarkin himself, he isn't totally sure, but he is led to believe, based on information accessible to him and even based on certain like cues that Vader might give about what he says or doesn't say, that he might be Anakin Skywalker. So Tarkin figured it out, and he doesn't have any Force sensitivity. So to me, it's not outside the realm of possibility that someone who is Force sensitive might have figured it out.
Right. Okay. And as we see, is using any scrap of information she can get to Kenobi. You know?
And to advance herself.
Exactly.
Because she's very, very, I guess opportunistic, but she's very, she has her eye on something larger. Like she wants to be Vader's right hand, and she doesn't care who she steps on.
And that's what Vader says. He's like, I know what you want,
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And so as soon as, and I don't know if this is clever editing or if this is part of it, it was like as soon as Obi-Wan finds out that Anakin is alive. See, that's the thing. He finds out Anakin's alive, but does Obi-Wan know of Darth Vader yet? I assume he does. I mean, he does.
Yeah, I think he does, because in Episode 3, Yoda even says to him, "The boy you knew, gone he is, consumed by Darth Vader."
Yeah, but if Obi-Wan ever found out that Vader's still Vadering around the galaxy, wouldn't that mean that he shouldn't have known that Anakin's alive? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, yeah. So I assume that in his isolation,
he's so out of the loop.
He's so out of the loop. He doesn't even know that Vader is a fearsome force for the Empire, basically the Emperor's fist. But one of the things that I loved about that scene and the way that McGregor plays it is just, you're right, not only is it like regret that's kind of bottled up and now is starting to open up, and fear, but also like, oh no, I had one job and I couldn't see a deal.
Yeah, I had the high ground.
He specifically went to kill him. And when he learns that he was not able to do that, all of a sudden, the very mission that he has devoted himself to for the last decade has gotten a lot more dangerous.
Yeah. Like he was, like, because that was the crux of Episode 3. It's like, he's beyond saving. I have to do this. I have to kill him.
And I mean, he even begs Yoda, "No, let me go after the Emperor." And Yoda says, "No, you're not strong enough. You have to go after your old apprentice." "But I can't do it. I can't kill my brother." "Well, you have to."
Yeah. And how ominous. So, like, as soon as he says Anakin, boom, you get, like, Hayden Christensen in, as Vader. Just the eyes. And, like, is that, like, a Force connection, or is that just clever editing? Like, was there some sort of, like, oh, crap, Vader knows, like, Obi-Wan,
That's a good question, man. I mean, I could see it either way. Like, as soon as he hears that from Reva, maybe he reaches out a little bit to try and verify it.
Right.
And in reaching out, he might make a tenuous connection to Vader.
Right.
And, of course, lights a fire under Vader's ass.
And because we know that can happen, we see it in the sequel trilogy. We see that, with Luke and Leia in the original trilogy. And, and we see Obi-Wan multiple times in this show try to commune with with Qui-Gon, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like he has not been successful yet. Or if he was in the past, it's not happening now, because that's another thing I think we're going to see in this show somehow, is the outcome of that, because it gets teased in episode 3. Yoda says, "I'll teach you how to commune with your old master." But he, I think 2 times he's like, "Okay, Qui-Gon, shit's going down. Be a great time for you to come out now." Anakin's alive. He's like, Master, he's coming,
Yeah.
And that Force connection that I was like, at the end of episode 2, I'm like, is there something to this? It makes me feel like that's even more of a possibility, because of what do you make of the Anakin sighting thing that's toward the beginning of episode 3? Like, they're in the desert. Obi-Wan sees somebody that looks like a Jedi in the distance, and it's Anakin, but he's pissed. Is it a vision? Is it a mirage? Is it a Force ghost? Is it a Force projection like we see in The Last Jedi? Or is it just Obi-Wan's mind playing tricks on him? Like, what is going on with that?
So I feel like it could go either way, because clearly he is still freaked out. The news is still fresh, and his eyes could be playing tricks on him. That's the last time that he really saw Anakin. That's what he looked like. However, we also know from Rebels that there was that moment where Ahsoka had reached out and Anakin spoke to her and appeared in what looked like a Force projection as Anakin, as his former self, speaking to her as Vader. So it could be that Vader was looking at him. And we know that Vader's capable of that. Like, we know that his power level is extremely high. I mean, that's why these badass Inquisitors fall like a hot knife through butter when Vader's around. No one can really stand up to him. The only one who probably has a chance to do so in this moment, in the entire galaxy, is Obi-Wan. And he's out of practice. So, just in terms of his ability to permeate the Force and to see things and to gather information, we know Vader's capable of doing that. Whether or not he actually did is still indeterminate, but that's another thing that I appreciate a lot about at least my favorite depictions of the Force, is that it's weird. You don't really know what is going on. There's supposedly a living Force that has its own will, but it's very mysterious and sometimes feels like dangerous for the characters on the light side. But if you tap into it too, I mean, it's like a river, It's just this force of nature that you have to kind of go with. And I feel like that instance where you see Anakin is one of those that brings up the idea of the ethereal nature of the Force, and whether or not it's Vader looking at him, can't totally say, but I kind of like the idea that it was.
Yeah, and I feel like that's not the last time we're going to see something like that in the show. Like, with 3 episodes left, we're going to get flashbacks. We're going to get more of this present day stuff. Like, something's gonna it's going to get weirder. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And so, yeah. So you're talking about how the Force a little bit before we wrap up and talk about the Obi-Wan Vader fight. You said earlier you had some things to say about how Obi-Wan talks about the Force and what it feels like, and he has there's a juxtaposition you were talking about between the first and third episodes, and the way he talks about it with Leia after she asks him what that feels like or what the Force is like, I thought was a really interesting scene, as is a lot of Leia's interaction with Obi-Wan, because she's so curious. She's like, "Are you my dad? Who do you really are? Did you know my dad? And is that, did you know my mom? Is that just a story?" All that kind of stuff,
Yeah. Yeah, the description of being afraid of the dark and the way that you feel when you turn on the light. You know, we are often so focused on like the dark badass kind of elements of force wielders in Star Wars, and you know, the rushing emotions that come with the dark side, or the quasi serenity that is supposed to come with the light side. But that was a really, really effective way of displaying and evoking how the light side of the force is supposed to make someone feel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but it also, there's another way to read into it too, in that, like, if you're cutting yourself off from it, or if you're not force sensitive, you live in the dark. And once you tap into it, you can actually see your surroundings for what they are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your ability to perceive is exponentially increased because of what you can sense. And I just thought that it was a beautiful way to call back to what we were seeing in that first episode, because he had clearly cut himself off and had probably been cut off for a long time, at least in the way that he used the force in those later episodes. So when he does tap into it again, and when he describes it, it adds like another layer of melancholy to his isolation and what he's forced himself into just to survive and to make sure that he can keep Luke safe. So I just appreciated that the way that he explained it. Obviously, he tried to explain it in a way that a child could understand, but it also gives us, as people who are not able to tap into a fictional energy field like the Force, it gives us a greater degree of understanding, like what it means and how it's there for you in a weird way. It sounds kind of strange to say, but it sounds like, you know, the Force is my companion. That's something that you hear Jedi say a lot, and that gives it additional credence. But it also just helps to emphasize how in the dark Obi-Wan has been for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, and the more that I think about the way he describes it, I'm like, man, that's a great way to describe Batman too. To be honest, about how like. And I'm not even joking. I think you even talked about it too before, Chris, about like how Batman is really like he's in the shadows, but he's really the light in the shadows, but only if you're, you know, not a criminal.
Hope from darkness.
Hope from darkness, exactly. Yeah, so it's a kind of interesting thing that can both describe the light side of the Force and Batman. I thought that was pretty cool.
But, you know, I'm glad you brought up Batman, too, though, because, you know, we've talked about a lot of these events that have been introduced in the fight that we're about to talk about is a big component of it. You know, a lot of people have been making a hubbub about the fact that there is a confrontation between Obi-Wan and Vader in the third episode, and how it's a retcon. Hell yeah, it's a retcon. Who cares? Who cares if it's a retcon? See, the benefit that you and I have, being comic book fans, and probably most people that are listening to a BOF show understand, is that not all retcons are bad. Sometimes retcons can be the foundation of classic stories that stand the test of time.
Yeah.
And there's no reason just to dismiss a retcon out of hand if it basically fits, but also if it tells a story of value. Yeah. And for what it's worth, so far anyway, I think this is a story of value, and this fight, it just amps up. The best retcons enrich the stories that you know take place before or after, and I feel like this conflict adds a whole other layer of understanding to their ultimate confrontation in episode 4. Yeah. And it also kind of helps to make sense of why their conversation with each other at that point was relatively brief. Like, you would figure, I haven't seen you in 20 years. I got a lot to say to you.
Yeah.
You know, a little more than I hate you, God, I hate you. You know, it was a brief conversation. We're getting more of that substance here, and I think that that's cool.
Yeah, and it's clearly just the first part of this. You know, And that's what some people are upset about. It's like, it should have been more spectacular, blah, blah, blah. It was underwhelming. I'm like, well, the lightsaber fight part of it is not that's not the highlight of this confrontation. The confrontation is the confrontation. And somebody had like a really good Twitter thread where they broke out like all of the Obi-Wan related dialogue to all of the retcons and analyzed things as like, Vader's like, I sense something, a presence I haven't felt since, he doesn't, in the sentence, we don't know how long he's talking about. He doesn't say it was 20 years ago. So if you saw Obi-Wan 9 years ago, it still makes sense. A lot of and I'm sure that they were very cognizant of that, to make, by the time this is over, it's still going to link to episode 4, so what episode 4 told us was true from a certain point of view. I think it's going to make sense.
Yeah, but I mean, also too, like people who have complained about the way that the fight went, I mean, there's such a huge disparity between the skill displayed by both combatants in episode 3 and 4.
Yes,
that
there's got to be some.
I think it can stand to have some sort of intermediate territory,
Yeah, and that's what this is too. And we haven't seen a Vader on screen that is the aerial acrobatist that you saw in episode 3, because he's not. He don't have arms or legs, and I think that's part of it, right? Like I think,
yeah, absolutely.
What was you would know this? Maybe it's just Darth Vader, but there was a book that came out close to episode 3 that was just like Vader Year 1, basically. I forget.
Yeah, the Dark Lord. It was another James book.
And I actually read that one. I got that one. I read that one.
Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader.
Yeah,
so one of the brilliant. I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the brilliant things about that, Lucino spoke about how he decided to write the cumbersome nature of the armor.
Yeah,
and he did it because he put on a Vader costume. And he basically described what it was like to actually wear a Darth Vader costume. You can't really feel your hands. You can't see very well.
It's cold. It's coarse.
Yeah, right.
His mask gets everywhere.
The cape is tugging on your back. It's just like it's uncomfortable to wear. So he decided to adapt that real world experience into an explanation for what it must be like for someone who is an acrobat. Losing a great degree of his mobility.
Yeah, exactly.
And having to change his fighting style as a result.
Exactly.
Vader, in pretty much every depiction, he is brute force. He changes the way that he fights because he cannot rely on his senses the way that he used to.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what I was getting at. I recall something in that book talking about how the suit feels and how, if this was a normal person that was like a non-Jedi, non-Force user, they wouldn't be able to survive in that kind of suit. Like it's the suit plus the fact that he's having to use all of his strength and with the Force to like keep that stuff even functional, to be able to even live with the arms, the fake arms and the robotic arms and legs and life support systems, and then also be a Jedi on top of it, and also fight with a lightsaber on top of it. Like there's a reason why he is this brute force, like, half man, half machine kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it is very succinctly wrapped up in his answer to what Obi-Wan asks him when the confrontation starts. Like, what have you become? I am what you made me. And there's so much behind that one line. And I think that's great. Like, they're choosing their words very carefully in this entire scene, and the way it goes down was just, it's crazy. Like, I wasn't, you see Darth Vader at the beginning of episode 3, and then I thought, okay, well, that's all we're going to see of him this time. But then, by the time that happens at the end, where he's landed, he's on the planet, he's coming, and Obi-Wan has to, and his reaction's crazy. Like, he's like, I'm getting the hell out of here. I'm running away. And and the way that it's shot, and then Vader confronts him. He's like, "Oh crap! I better get my lightsaber out."
And we know
I'm
Vader
gonna run
can
away.
hide and spook out of corners because it's exactly how he stalked Luke on Bespin.
Exactly.
He just shows up out of nowhere, and
Yeah.
you don't know where he's coming from. And that's a hallmark of the way that he not only terrifies the people that he opposes, but it's the way that he beats them too. But I love too just how McGregor plays the fight itself. Vader is only ever wielding his saber with one hand, and Obi-Wan is holding on to his with both for dear life. And Vader is just pounding the living crap out of him. And I mean, that's the way that you expect it to go. Obi-Wan thinks that he's about to fight Anakin, and he realizes, oh no, I'm fighting something totally different. And he later has to compensate for that, and he does it in a pretty solid way. But at the beginning, in this first confrontation, it's really disorienting, not just emotionally, seeing what has resulted from Anakin's turn to the dark side, but it's also physically demanding in that this guy's going to overwhelm me, and he totally will if I keep this going for longer. I need to go back and I need to regroup and figure out that I got to figure out how to fight again, and I have to figure out how to survive this guy.
Yeah. It's going to be very interesting to see what Obi-Wan takes out of this fight.
Yeah.
For the next one. And Vader as well, right? Because
definitely.
Now Vader knows what he's, working with.
Vader is probably in a position of far greater confidence. I mean, he comes to the same conclusion that we see him come to in episode 4. It's like, years have made you weak. Your power is a weak, old man. I mean, it's just... But there is something like Obi-Wan clearly has a better handle on how to manage Vader in a fight by then that he certainly does not have now. And it'll be interesting to see how we learn about the ways in which he develops that. So episode 3 was just fascinating. And I think that it counts as a good retcon for what it's worth. But there's, we're only halfway through, and it'll be really interesting to see how this next half goes. Definitely.
Yeah, to see what other kind of conversation they could possibly have. What other, because we know the ending. We know where this goes. So what kind of interesting things are going to fill the gap here that is going to provide worth and meaning to what we see? And it's going to be very fascinating.
Yeah.
To see like what, oh man, what's Vader going to do if he ever catches Obi-Wan? And we're kind of seeing what he would do. I mean, the first thing is like, burn me, I'm going to burn you. Now I got the high ground. Like he's and to see him like quote lose already is like, oh crap, like what? Here's the other one last little like thing here is like, well, why is he afraid of fire? Why didn't he just force jump over the fire? Why didn't he just, what's the deal? And I'm like, well, he can't. Like, that's part of it. It's like he's this powerful Jedi, but like
these people
also
need to watch
kind
the
of
animated
pathetic
shows. They really do, because the second season of Rebels features a lot of Vader, and you see what he doesn't jump over the environment, he forces the environment around him. That is what Vader does.
That's more of a Vader thing. Yeah.
He is such a brute force of nature as a wielder of the dark side. Like, he's not this nimble chosen one anymore.
Right.
That's the thing that has just totally changed, and people need to stop equating the skills of Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. There's certainly some
Darth Vader is
crossover,
different.
because they are the same person at the end of the day, but they're physically very different, and the way that they approach problems is very different, owing to their very, very altered outlooks between those 2 points in his life. So Vader is just brute force. If you haven't seen the second season of Rebels, watch it. The brutality that you see from Vader will help to alter your perceptions of not only what he can do, but what he wants to do. And that's really what wins out at the end of the day. He finds it satisfying to force anything to his will.
Mm-hmm. And it shows that shot too, and you can see the fire inside, reflected in Darth Vader's eyes. And I'm like, is he afraid of fire too? Like deep down, just because it's like, yeah, I burned up, and kind of, it's like, I'm going to make you burn up, Obi-Wan, like I did.
He's absolutely a creature of fear. Why else would he not have found
that's the whole
Obi-Wan?
Thing.
He never found Obi-Wan on Tatooine, at least as far as we know. He doesn't want to go back there.
Mm-hmm.
That place took as much from him as it gave him. And it took his mother from him. And, he associates it with a life of slavery. When he returns to Tatooine, like, you see him go back there, like at the beginning of his first Marvel ongoing series starting in 2015. You know what he did when he got there for fun? He slaughtered an entire encampment of Tusken Raiders. I wonder why.
Again.
Yeah.
Oh.
For fun. Because that's Darth Vader. He's not Anakin Skywalker anymore. He will be again, but right now he is as deeply immersed in the dark side as he will ever be.
Right. And that is what Obi-Wan is already seeing. Like he's seeing him walk down the streets, like killing people, like and toying with Vader's them.
Yeah, and when he talks to Luke later, he truly believes that Vader's irredeemable. Why?
Yeah.
Well, we're starting to see why.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So we've got 3 episodes left. I'm excited to see where it goes. I don't want to make predictions enough to say like I'm going to be disappointed if X, Y, or Z doesn't happen, but I'm very interested to see what happens with Leia, what happens with Reva, and of course, like I hope Obi-Wan gets some mojo back so he can I can feel a little bit more hopeful at the end of this than I did at the end of episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So,
well, I think Leia's your tether there,
right?
She seems like she's in pretty good shape by the time we see her in episode 4. So, I'm sure he does something right.
Yeah, and this is it's already going to be a cool like segue right from episode 3 to this show to Rogue One. Yeah. Because you've got Leia and Bail Organa in Rogue One also, and Vader, right? So it'll be really
the people thinking he's going to jump over the fire. Did you not watch that scene in Rogue One? I mean,
exactly. It kind of and Rogue One maintained that same Vader, right? So yeah. Just the choices they made in the fight were so good. The fact that he did just use the one hand the whole time. I mean, it's and the other hand for the little force push. Yeah.
I mean, just look how he created that fire. It's not like he just tossed a match on the ground. He forced it to happen out of his sheer will because he wants Obi-Wan to burn the way that he did. It's such a petty Sith Vader vengeance kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And it works. It totally works.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that is good for me. Is there anything else you want to say about the show so far?
No, man. I think we said a lot. And again, I appreciate the invitation. Looking forward to what's next. Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, cool. And that's the advantage of doing the satellite show. We have a platform to kind of keep talking about this stuff that's outside of the Batman on film realm. So so you got anything else to plug or promote at the moment?
If you like Star Trek, check out my Star Trek podcast, Discovery Debrief. We are knee-deep in discussing the first season of the current show, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which is phenomenal, and you should totally check it out if you haven't. Harkens back to characters that were introduced way back in the original series' first pilot episode from 1964, including some classic characters from the original series like Spock and Uhura and a couple of other familiar faces. But it's just a great single episode at a time show. There's like some larger thematic serialization in the thematic sense, but they're single episodes, so they're a lot of fun to watch. all the environments are really varied, and the characters are awesome. So highly recommend. And listen to us talk about it on Discovery Debrief.
Awesome. Cool. And you can follow me, of course, on Twitter at SMB_Ryan, and you can follow this show. Gosh, I didn't even promote this show's Twitter. This show does have a Twitter. It's BOF Show. And of course, the Batman Podcast Network is Batpod Network. So that will do it for today's episode. For Chris, I'm Ryan. May the Force be with you.
Haha, yeah.
You've been listening to the Batman on Film Satellite Show, BOF's non-Batman pop culture podcast. Follow the show on Twitter at BOF Show. Follow BOF on Twitter at The Batman on Film. For all of Team BOF, I'm announcer Rachel. Authoritative, definitive, the original Batman on Film, established in 1998.